There comes a time when silence is betrayal. Martin Luther King. On distance. I chuckled when I read a tweet by a nurse who says she loves wearing a mask because she can pour M&Ms inside it and graze on the candy all day like a horse. Another woman said she'll miss wearing a mask because throughout the pandemic she's been mouthing the F word in public without anyone knowing it. The pandemic has inspired in us what feels like new emotions. Or if the emotions are not new, then the unusual circumstances under which we are experiencing them are warping these emotions into a strange and unfamiliar newness. We communicate a lot more with our eyes now that our lips are covered, and we feel the need to exaggerate our smiles and laughter in order for them to be seen in our eyes and heard in our muffled voices. The same with our anger, frustration, and disappointment. We make our eyes and voices do a lot more work to show our feelings. Lick all the office phones, of course. It sucks we haven't been able to do that. One person answered when someone tweeted, "If the pandemic ended right now, what would you do first?" Jokes aside, most answers conveyed how much we miss physical closeness and touch. A woman said she'd drive 24 hours straight to Texas and give her parents a hug. This answer was the most common, with different destinations, length of drive, and various family members. One man said he misses shaking hands with people. A woman said she misses hugging people. And single people miss having sex. To be with others was the common feature in all the answers. Many said they want to have a real funeral for a parent they lost during the pandemic. And many said they want to go to a concert, the theater, the beach, church, bars, and clubs. Gathering with others to share joy and solace is what we miss. It's been interesting to see how we found ways to gather, despite the distance, or in spite the distance. We Zoomed, we Skyped, we Google Met, and we FaceTimed. Because of social distancing, we took online classes. And because classes are virtual, people from various parts of the country and the world have access to them. I took an online writing class in Cleveland, where I met Ruth, who lives in LA. Ruth and I stayed in touch after the writing class ended, checking in on each other, expressing shock and disbelief at all the horrors the Trump era had brought, worry and concern about the terrible forest fires California suffered this year, and joy and elation that a strong woman of color is going to be our vice president. We joked about belly dancing in the street on Inauguration Day, which I still might do tomorrow. The other day, Ruth and I Zoomed, and she began to tell me about a boy she knew when she was 16. He's black, and she's from a conservative Jewish family. They met while doing volunteer work in Pennsylvania, where they were both born and raised. When the volunteer work we were doing ended that summer, we separated, Ruth began. We didn't go to the same school, so we decided to write to each other. It was the 60s, she laughed shyly. Then she added in a low, shame-filled voice, or maybe it was because I knew my family would not approve if he called me on the phone. She stopped for a moment, then continued. One day, my father opened and read a letter Douglas sent me while I was in school. I came home to find everyone fuming. My father and brother-in-law were shouting and bellowing threats, my mother crying. I was mortified. I ran to my room, slammed and locked the door, only for my brother-in-law to break the lock and barge in yelling and threatening to break my skull with the hammer he used to break the door. My bedroom door was left open for the following 2 years until I left home for college. Your parents' decision to bring in your brother-in-law to yell at you and threaten to kill you was completely irrational, I told her. Ruth's eyes were dark and sad. Were your parents angry because you were receiving letters from a boy, or because he was a black boy? I asked. Because he was black, Ruth said, her voice heavy and grave. That's how people like my parents thought in the 60s, that it was dangerous for a white girl to be seen with a black boy. Interracial marriages were outlawed until 1967, and my parents kept yelling, "You'll get pregnant, you'll get pregnant, and then what will you do?" But our letters were so innocent, and we weren't even meeting in person. I nodded. How did they know from the letter that Douglas was black? I asked. He was telling me how on our last day of volunteering, he wanted to run after me to ask if we could stay in touch. But he couldn't be seen running after me in the street, because if the cops see a black boy running after a white girl, they'll shoot him. That this was the lesson his mother taught him since he was a child. So he went around the block, hoping he'll catch up with me at the other end, Ruth said. I put my head in my hand, staggered. I needed to contemplate this. The distance, and the want for closeness, and the many years, the 56 years, Ruth had kept and carried this memory, this trauma, after 2 husbands and 2 children, and moving to Canada, and moving back to the US, then moving from Pennsylvania to LA, and the death of both her parents. There was a small tear in her eye that never dropped. She found Douglas recently on Facebook. He has health problems, and his communication is inconsistent. He lives in the Midwest. Distance. We were both quiet for a while before we talked about what we're planning to do for Martin Luther King's Day. Ruth is donating to the Equal Justice Initiative after watching and loving the film Just Mercy that tells the story of lawyer Brian Stevenson, who created the initiative to raise money and awareness for the wrongly condemned in the Black community.